Okay, good morning. Surprised to see so many people here. I was sort of assuming that everyone was hungover, that the next talk would be the first actual people attended. So, but luckily I did write some slides anyway. My name is Christian Schaller, and I'm the manager for the so-called emerging platform team, which consists of the people doing the desktop, the Fedora team, and the installer team at Red Hat. What I want to do with this talk is talk a little bit about, I guess, Red Hat's interest in the desktop, and I guess also what concretely is happening at currently. So I sort of call my first slide evolving how we think about the desktop. I guess I see, when I sort of read online, and for that matter even sometimes internally, I see there's a lot of misconceptions about Red Hat and the desktop, in the sense that, why we're involved at all with the desktop and to what degree we care and so on. So I thought I'd try to cover some of these topics. And I felt that since it's usable evolve, it would be nice to start with a picture of the old Xerox PARC desktop, which I guess was the first real desktop ever. So I mean, a question that often comes up, both I guess outside and to some degree inside Red Hat, is do Red Hat care about the desktop? I mean, obviously, the bulk of Red Hat's revenue comes from, for instance, a Red Hat server, not from our desktop business. And of course, when you go out in press, you see mostly talk about things like Docker, OpenStack, and similar technologies. But still, the answer is yes, Red Hat do care about the desktop. I mean, we have a quite sizable desktop team. And of course, there is a Red Hat Workstation product, for instance. And of course, there is Fedora, which is also been predominantly used as a project on the desktop, where Red Hat is a major supporter. So when I say the answer is yes, but maybe not in the way people expect, is that, I mean, I guess when someone asks if like a company that really care about the desktop, I guess it's often asked in the context of for instance, revenue or whether it's a sort of strategic project. And I guess the desktop is not strategic in the sense that that's where Red Hat expects to earn our next $1 billion. But it is a key component in a lot of the things we do, and it's sort of an important support function for a lot of the things we do. And I think the other reason that this question comes up a lot is also because, for instance, like, another, for instance, been interviews with Jim Whitehurst, where he sort of is asked what to Red Hat think about the desktop, and said, well, Red Hat doesn't care about the desktop. And that is sort of true in the sense that Red Hat doesn't have like a business interest on whether, people run Linux on their home computers, or whether you manage to get your grandma or grandfather onto Linux. But we still have an interest in desktop, both as, of course, a development environment for solutions, and of course, we have a workstation product that we target at very specific markets. And of course, we do care about our customers and those markets, but once again, I guess when people say desktop, I think it's often more the consumer desktop, and Red Hat doesn't necessarily have a direct business interest on what they call the consumer desktop. You have a little spelling mistake. Anyway, I guess another enduring myth is that Red Hat makes no money from the desktop, and this is like a loss-making enterprise, the thing we do around it, and this is wrong. I mean, Red Hat doesn't break out the numbers in our earnings report, so I'm not at liberty to sort of give the numbers, but the fact is Red Hat Workstation business has been profitable for many, many years. So it's not like, Red Hat's desktop investments is sort of an act of charity. So it also leads to another question, is sort of why do Red Hat care about Fedora? And of course, I guess the most common answer to that question is that it is the next RHEL. And this is, of course, true. I mean, every RHEL release tends to have been sort of, forked off from Fedora at some point and hardened. But it's not the only reason we care about Fedora. I mean, Fedora has another function, I think, for Red Hat, is because it's an entry point into the Red Hat ecosystem. I mean, a lot of people who would use Fedora, like students, developers, and so on. We'd start by using Fedora, and then of course that would later lead them into, for instance, choosing RHEL as their platform of choice when they, start working at a company in their IT department, or when they decide what platform to use at their startups. So I think it's fair to say that Red Hat's interest in Fedora goes beyond, it just being sort of a development station for RHEL. So that said, of course, we have been doing certain things at Red Hat and in the Fedora community, for that matter, around the desktop for a long while. And I think this goes a little bit back to part of motivation for why, for instance, I personally was very supportive of this plan that was launched to do Fedora next and split up Fedora into 2 products and try to do things a little differently. And at the same point, we're doing changes in how we do the desktop RHEL too, because to start with our RHEL approach, the approach with RHEL has been that we launch a version of RHEL with a certain version of the desktop, and then we sort of keep fixing bugs, but we never update it. So at some point, it becomes like a very nice picture into what the desktop looked like 5 years ago. And while that, of course, has sort of worked for a lot of people, it also meant that, I think the RHEL desktop offerings have often started feeling a bit long in the tooth towards the end of any given RHEL lifecycle. And of course, it's also become added a lot of extra work for us because we end up having to backport stuff to really old versions of the desktop. Well, on the Fedora side, sorry, wrong keyboard. On Fedora side, we have sort of maybe gone a bit too far in the other approach, where everything has been sort of pulled in at the very last minute, and anything goes in terms of what we pull in. So it's been sort of quite gung-ho, the desktop approach in Fedora, and that of course created this image also, or in some sense a reality, that Fedora was a very unstable system. And I know that we lost a lot of Fedora users over the years simply because people were sort of assuming that, using Fedora, you were basically in constant beta mode. So what we've been working on recently is both, revise how we do RHEL, and of course how we do the Fedora desktop in Fedora through the Fedora Workstation. So we're basically trying to keep the 2 systems closer together, and that means that I'm not sure if I should be allowed to say this, but anyway, we are planning on rebasing the desktop in RHEL. Current plans is to do that in RHEL 7.2, which means that I think for the first time ever there will actually be a new version of GNOME shipping in an existing RHEL release. And at the same time, we have sort of tried to take the policy in not just Fedora Workstation, but the Fedora in general, to be more leading edge and less bleeding edge. Which means that, of course, we still will try to make sure to bring new and exciting stuff into Fedora as fast as possible, but not necessarily bring it in before it's ready, which I think maybe has been the case in the past. And I guess maybe a good example of maybe that sort of, call it, change in mindset, even though it's not directly desktop related, but for instance, there was a request this time to bring in the new version of GCC and sort of rebuild the whole distribution with it for next Fedora release, and that got pushed back, saying that that's just too risky to do and also too time consuming. So I think that will be our policies going forward, that you will see at the same point that the RHEL workstation will be updated on a somewhat regular basis inside the RHEL lifecycle. At the same point, there's a much more focus on keeping things stable in Fedora land and making sure that when you pull stuff in, it is ready. And to mention a very specific desktop technology there, I mean, we have been working quite a lot on getting Wayland, the new display system, ready for use on Fedora. And we have a sort of a state policy there that we are not going to switch to Wayland by default before we're 100% certain that it will be a truly transparent switch for people. So while we, for instance, for the next version of Fedora are expecting Wayland to be more or less feature complete, it will still just be an alternative option for at least that release and maybe the next one either also. So I think you'll sort of both see that, as we go forward, I think we will be able to address, the needs of the RHEL workstation and the need of the Fedora workstation a lot better. And the other thing is, of course, that both RHEL and Fedora are, I think, complement each other very well. There are certain markets where we have a lot of customers using RHEL workstation. Animation and effects studios, for instance, are big customers. We have a lot of people in oil and gas using the RHEL workstation. Quite actually a few point of sale system on the RHEL. People doing CAD/CAM. And of course, a lot of people using the RHEL workstation for development of solutions to deploy on, for instance, RHEL servers and so on. And for those of you who have sort of read over Fedora Workstation PRD, of course, it's sort of, once again, a very developer and DevOps target system. Actually, as I meant, notes I didn't actually put developer specifically on here. But I mean, when I talk about students' hobbies, I mean, we are, of course, talking about people basically using Fedora as a development machine. And we're sort of targeting it at people who are doing development in kind of sort of more startup situations or at university and these kind of settings. Or for that matter, also for, I mean, we know that a lot of people at universities and researchers using the workstation. Although, of course, we actually have quite a few people running RHEL there too, so that's, I guess, a split group depending on exactly what they're doing. So that sort of, I guess, explains a little bit where we've been and the things we've been, in some sense, the background for the things we're doing. So I thought I try to go and look at more concretely some of the things that we have as plans and goals going forward for our involvement for both doing our Red Hat Workstation product and also our goals for participating in the Fedora Workstation project. So the first goal here is sort of a bit more long-term, but we want to sort of unify the platform. And what I mean by that is not that they will be the same operating system or have the same exact versions of everything, but we would still like to have some kind of shared application platform available that is available between Fedora and RHEL. And the reason for this is that at the moment we have sort of split ourselves in terms of what ISVs can target between RHEL and Fedora. So you have, for instance, a lot of software certified and access available for RHEL that is not at least guaranteed to work on a given Fedora install. I mean, an example there, for instance, is the Maya animation package that's available for RHEL, but it's not available, or at least not officially supported on Fedora. While we also have software targeting Fedora that is not the same way guaranteed to work on RHEL. I mean, the Chrome browser is a good example there. And I mean, the advantage there, of course, is that if we can provide something that if you target it, it will work on both platforms. It gives any independent software vendor who wants to target our platforms a bigger market to target. And this makes it more interesting to spend more time supporting both people on RHEL and Fedora. So, of course, I will talk a little bit more about this later, some of the practical ways we're trying to do this. But of course, given that these two systems are different, and of course they have different profiles and targets in terms of like level of support and hardness and how life cycle and so on. It will of course be a sort of a subset API we'll be able to offer there, but I do hope that for at least a lot of these third-party applications, we should be able to do something that allows people to target both. Okay, so there's another major goal, and this of course is directly ties into the goal of the Fedora Workstation having a developer and sysadmin target. And when we started discussing that, I sort of put as a first point is like realize that developers and sysadmins are people too, and I think the thing is when you start enumerating what is important to a developer, you quickly realize that of course the basic things that a developer looks for is very often the same as anyone else. Like improved battery life is as true for a developer as it is for anyone else in this world, and of course having just a stable system for that matter is of course as important for a developer as anyone else. So I mean, when you look at the Fedora work list and the things that we're trying to do there, I mean, a lot of these items are just as valuable for anyone else, but at the same point, of course, the fact that we are trying to have a clear developer focus just means, of course, that we are looking at features that might be a bit more marginal also for a general audience, and but it also means that, I mean, I think people often sort of think like, oh, technical users, that means we should make the systems have an option for everything. But I mean, even a developer, for instance, want their system to just work. They don't. I mean, I think like take battery life as a good example, right? Where currently, if you want to improve your battery life, you install PowerTop, and then there's like 500 options you can try and check to see if it improves things or not. While we should be able to do equally good job as Windows or Mac there to just make sure that out of the box you get at least as close to as good battery life as possible. I mean, I think battery life is, I guess, a good example of something where, of course, there are trade-offs like performance versus battery life. So there's not everything we can do because some things are, of course, a user preference. There was an older version of GNOME tried to, for instance, preserve your battery life by forcing you to reduce your brightness levels. Because that's actually the single biggest drain usually on your system these days. It's actually if you have a lot of brightness on your screen, if you cut that down, that will literally add hours to your battery life. But on the other hand, when we tried to then automate that the first time, it ended up being a lot of people frustrated with the fact that they felt they were battling their computer about what the brightness level should be. So we have some efforts going there now to try to be smarter about that, but it's still one of the things which is partially preference. I mean, some people want a brighter screen, and other people are fine with it being a bit darker. And of course, I mean, concretely in terms of developers too, right? We are focusing on improving both how the tools work on the platform, and this sort of also helps. I mean, both on Fedora and RHEL, this ties into a lot of these efforts happening at Red Hat. With, making sure that if you want to do development for Docker or for OpenStack and so on, you can do that, and you can do that as easily as possible using Fedora Workstation or RHEL Workstation. And of course, it's also part of lowering the barriers to get access to these tools. And I mean, I think that plays into a lot of the work we've been doing around the software installer to just make sure that software becomes discoverable. Because if your primary interface is just something that lets you search on application name, unless you happen to know the name of a given application, you are not easily able to discover it. Another major goal we're doing called Integrate the Web. I mean, I think anyone who works, anyone who does anything, they notice, of course, that a lot of things we do. I mean, I think for me personally, I probably spend 80% of my time inside a web browser, and I think that's true in most professional environments. I mean, even we, for instance, have seen a lot of people over recent years switch in their internal email services to things like Google-hosted webmail. I think there's almost no sales sim left in the world that doesn't use Salesforce. And of course, so we constantly use web services for things like, keeping in touch with friends and family and colleagues over using chat and so on. So, okay. So what we're basically trying to do is we're trying to take a lot of these web services and weave them into the desktop, making sure that they feel like a natural extension of your desktop, and that the desktop is also become a partner to your web browser in terms of giving you access to these web services. And at the same point, of course, a lot of new applications being web apps, we're trying to make sure that you can, essentially use them on your desktop and make them feel like a native application. I think, so we already have some of these things in place, and we're trying to work on expanding it. But it basically means that if you install, for instance, apps from the Chrome store or from the Firefox store or through the web browser, you can run this standalone, and you can have access to them through your session management as sort of separate applications instead of sort of getting them presented as browser window number 500. And I think that sort of is it's just a realization of the fact that all these things are web-based, but you still necessarily. I think the problem, of course, if you just leave things as sort of that's a browser app. It can become a bit painful to work with, because everything just, as I said, it becomes just, as you try to tab through your windows, you have like maybe 10 browser windows, and it's hard to distinguish them. Well, if we try to make this integration close, and you can let's say you have installed Angry Birds through Chrome, then it can be an Angry Birds window instead of a Chrome window. Yeah. Another goal is to meet modern expectations. I think one of the things we have sort of been spending a lot of time thinking about and trying to make sure we do is to update the desktop experience to match what people expect these days. And the first item, we provide an integrated application store. We have a lot of discussion about people about whether. I think a lot of Linux distributions, for instance, still has sort of had the mindset that, hey, if you want to install an application, the way to do that is, you start searching on Google or Yahoo or something, and then you'll find the web page of the software vendor, and they might be providing you a package to install. And I think it's fair to say that I think that is not the expectation of the modern user anymore. Both through what you see on the phones with Android and iPhone and so on, but also through both on Windows and Mac. The place to expect to find your applications is through an application store. And it doesn't necessarily need to be like, a for-pay application store, but you have a dedicated application to help you discover new applications. So this has been a major effort in Fedora, where we have been sort of working on making sure we have decent metadata and screenshots and good descriptions and available, so that we can have an app store that lets you find things. And we're bringing that into the RHEL universe with RHEL 7.2. And of course, as we go forward, we're trying to figure out ways to broaden the scope of software in there even wider. And I guess sort of a follow-on point to that, of course, is that it's just about providing a software store, but we're also trying to work on our tooling and what we have available to make life for those interested in supporting our platforms as easy as possible. Because there might be a lot of software out there where Red Hat or the Fedora community and so on is not interested in necessarily doing the work about packaging or making this available, or not even able to for various reasons. And but we still want this to be available to our users. So next major item is application bundles. We've actually been discussing that name a bit, but what we're trying to do here is basically try to come up with a new way for packing application. In some sense, the current way we are doing packaging and shipping Fedora and RHEL is that we are treating end user applications and operating system as, in some sense, the same thing. And this has worked to some degree, but we think that if we accept that they are different and start treating them different, we can make life for everyone a lot easier. Yeah?
Today is not
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so the next point there is Alex there. He's doing a talk actually today at 11:30. Is the right time, right? Talking about his work there for desktop application bundles. Where we're basically trying to come up with a new and better way of how to ship applications and how to update applications, and how to deal with the life cycle of applications. I mean, to take some concrete, a common complaint that I sort of seen a lot recently is that people complain about the fact that when you install software these days in Fedora, no matter what you install, you have to reboot your system. And part of the reason for that is that currently we don't really have a very good way to differentiate between stuff that updates libraries that might be shared between a lot of different applications and updates that only update one very specific thing. So I think these application bundles will be part of the way for us to try to address that and allow us to, for instance, stop requiring you to restart your application when you just install a new version of a desktop application. So anyway, I recommend for everyone to go to Alex's talk today and see what we're doing there. So another major thing we're working on, and this is true for both for RHEL and for Fedora, is improve the hardware story. I think anyone today who's tried to install Linux on a brand new laptop, I've noticed that it can be quite. You get different mileage basically. If you're lucky, sometimes everything works really well. Sometimes things work well enough to be okay, but there's always that one or two things that doesn't properly work, and often maybe that will start working after 3, 4, 5, 6 months after you bought the laptop as you sort of catch up. But we want to try to improve that so that when you buy a machine, you can sort of be quite certain that it will work, and it will work more or less perfectly. So the way we're trying to do that is we're currently working on trying to establish some partnerships with some hardware vendors, where we will be working with them closely to make sure that whenever they release a new model in a, for instance, given series, it works out of the box perfectly. We're not at the moment pursuing a policy of trying to get them to pre-install, but it's just about being able to sort of say that, hey, if you buy this piece of hardware, we can promise you that Fedora 22, for instance, will work perfectly on it, and make sure we support even a bit more sort of fringe features of the hardware. And of course, in order for us to be able to do that, it means that we need those close vendor relationships, because we need often access to hardware before it's publicly available, and not sort of just being able to get hold of it after we gotten complaints from people saying that, hey, my new dynamic function keys doesn't work as expected, and so on. Another major thing we're trying to fix, and in some sense the general development has sort of helped us fix this, is to improve the situation around BIOS updates. We do know a lot of people have had a situation, right? You bought a new laptop that usually can pre-install with Windows. You delete the Windows partition and install Linux. And then you notice that there are some things on the system that might not work exactly as expected. And in some cases, it turns out that these are because there are bugs in the BIOS that was shipped with the hardware. And then you suddenly realize that this vendor is only shipping a BIOS update tool available for Windows. And since you just deleted your Windows partition, you're suddenly then scrambling to figure out how to get Windows reinstalled so you can upgrade the BIOS in order to get Linux back on it again and working correctly. As it happens, there's been a lot of work recently to include BIOS update functionality to the UEFI standard. This means that probably starting from about a year from now, all new laptops coming out will be supporting this standard for how to do BIOS updates. And we have got hold of some prototype hardware from Intel that we're currently working on, so that once these laptops become available, And we expect you to be able to update your BIOS on most hardware using this UEFI functionality and running on Linux. And as I said earlier, we want to make battery life good out of the box. I think one of the major things we're trying to work on there is, of course, figuring out good defaults, but the other thing is that a lot of new modern laptops these days come using this thing called ambient light sensor, which basically tries to detect the amount of light in your room and then adjust screen brightness based on that. This has not been very well supported in Linux so far, but we're trying to fix that and make sure that, at least for, once again, the hardware models that we sort of end up partnering around, has this working correctly. So the last thing is not a goal, but it's sort of, I guess, something I thought to bring up, because I think, especially as I think for a company like Red Hat, who have a very long history of very close collaboration and working together with our upstreams, and I think it's true for a lot of people in the upstream community in general, right, is that you want to, in some sense, respect your upstream and be a good citizen. But you can't let that go. You can't let that be at the cost of your users. And of course, I mean, if something you want to do gets a pushback from the upstream, of course, it's a very good reason to evaluate whether you actually should be doing it. But at the end of the day, if you still truly believe that what you're doing is correct, you should make sure to do it regardless of whether you can get that patch in upstream. And we started doing that in the Fedora Workstation. We have a few modules where we have patches now that upstream did not accept. And of course, there's some limit, of course, to how much you can do this, because you don't necessarily want a situation where you maintain a gigantic patch set. But I think it's still a sort of important thing to remind oneself of, is that working and expecting your upstream is good, but you need to put your users first. So my last slide is also to mention that we have a Fedora Workstation roadmap session where most of the Workstation working group members are there to both talk a little bit about our plans, but also, of course, to answer questions. So I, once again, would recommend everyone interested to attend that one. So that's basically what I have. So do anyone have any questions or comments? First? Yeah.
You mentioned the HTML integration. Well, basically it was about integrating HTML into GNOME or GDK or whatever. What about the other direction? Like, you have this GDK HTML backend. So are there any plans to work with a bit further to add some things like authentication or whatever?
Alex, I guess it's your baby. Well, the question was about HTML5 backend for GTK.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's a joke. I don't know. Is it really useful? Has anyone ever used the HTML5 backend for GTK?
Well, I tried it, but I asked him if you are going to fix it and make it work.
No, I mean, it's not on my current plans. It's something I did because it was cool and it was doable, but it's not something that I have time to spend time productizing.
I think there's big potential in it,
and what would the target use case be? Because I haven't really been able to figure out.
well, all this system management, if you have conflict,
Those are much better as web apps than pretending that a GK app can be efficiently sent over.
They're easier to maintain if they're web apps than if they are GK apps.
So what people don't expect like a desktop.
Another example is Anaconda. It's written in GDK.
Yeah, that's one thing. I agree with that. That would be kind of cool. If Anaconda had a web back and launch it and connect to it and get the full GUI. That would be cool. Yeah.
So I guess the answer is we don't.
It's not currently on my.
So I guess the answer is we don't have a very concrete plan to try to push that further. I mean, Author has an interesting prototype and a tech demo, but of course, if someone in the community is willing to take it and run with it, that's fine. But I think speaking, I guess, on behalf of the Fedora working group, Workstation working group, we're not looking at pushing that as a major thing forward. Langdon, I think you had a question? Yeah?
Hopefully
So you said you concerned like partnering with hardware vendors more. Is there a plan for like how you publish that information? So will there be the Fedora Workstation recommended 5 laptops or whatever?
Yes, I don't think I have a very concrete plan for how it exactly get published, but essentially, I guess what we will do is that we will announce that we are working with vendor XYZ on models XYZ. So these are the ones that if you get them, you can be certain that they will work well.
I know that's going back to developers are users too, right? It's like sometimes you just want to go to the webpage and be like, could you tell me what to go buy because I really don't want to go and dig into the details of laptops these days. No. So it definitely advertising it, and my hope is that we can put that information as somewhere prominent on the Fedora web pages, or at least in the release notes for a given release, saying that these are the laptops that we have made sure should work well for you for this given release. Okay, you.
When you say you want to have a common platform between Fedora and Rails, I think that wasn't the main difference why programs are usually targeting one or the other, that Fedora is much newer libraries than Rails. So is your plan to ship old libraries in Fedora from now on, or what?
No, our general plan there, and once again, I think if you go to Alex's talk, he will mention sort of what this idea of doing sort of like a runtime that people can target. So on one side, of course, you will have the system copy of the libraries that will keep having different pace in RHEL and Fedora. But that, as an extra thing, you will probably have then this runtime that we can ship as a runtime both on RHEL and on Fedora, and hopefully on other distributions too, that people can target for having something that works multiple places.
So just like .NET? That's the goal?
Yes, maybe. Okay. Yeah.
So we were talking about DevOps and Fedora.
Hmm?
And basically, if we day-to-day work as a sysadmin, for example, we need to use serverless credentials. So what are your plans to integrate people with this kind of things? HTML5 applications like this. And we have something in Fireplace. Creating a basic impact from users' experience perspective. So what are your plans here?
Well, in terms of Kerberos specifically, yeah. Okay, yes. So the question was, what are our plans for Kerberos integration and support? There is already some support for Kerberos in what is called GNOME Online accounts, and we actually have currently an internal project at Red Hat where we are, in terms of our internal use of RHEL Workstation, because we of course use Kerberos extensively internally. So we're trying to make sure that every service inside Red Hat that needs Kerberos will be able to use your initial the credentials you provide initially, instead of having to separately log into every system. And our goal is that once we finish that up and make sure that works well inside our corporate standard build, we will try to bring that out and put that into RHEL and Fedora too, so that people can use that kind of higher integration level there too. So it's definitely something that is getting worked on and looked at, and hopefully will improve in the course of the coming months.
So if I get Mark's file, I'll get a mention.
Yes, I hope so. I can't make any 100% promises, but yes, it is a priority for us.
I'm just worried that it will come back to me.
Okay, first. Yeah.
Related to that, with that like more stabilization phase, is there any plans to focus more on blocks? Because whenever we file a block in GPK, it's assigned to a single person, and there are lots of them, and there is basically no way to prioritize them. So there's really no way to tell you guys that, okay, this is really important because people are complaining about it, and we cannot do anything about it.
Yeah, well, prioritization of bugs. I guess like anyone. Okay, I'm actually running out of time, but I think like anyone, we're in a situation that, of course, there's a lot more items coming in and enhancement requests, and we have a realistic chance of addressing. I think the main tool that we're trying to use these days and help improve is, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's a server called retrace.fedoraproject.org,
where at least we get statistics on, for instance, of how often certain bugs hit or crashes hit and so on. So that's one of our primary prioritization tools at the moment. I mean, it doesn't help us necessarily prioritize enhancement requests. I mean, that's currently more of a, I guess, subjective thing we're doing. But at least in terms of general prioritization, that retail server is the only tool we have at the moment. But I mean, I don't, any suggestions for how to improve that, of course, would be welcome. Okay, so I'm out of time. So thanks, everyone. And I mean, if you have more questions, come to the roadmap session and feel free to ask further questions there. Thank you.